Hello guys and welcome to a new episode of Leibniz Lecture. Today we're going to talk about Spring Security and JWT. So all the basics that you should know, and we will just go through one demo example so that you see how that works. Before we start, I want to mention that this video is part of my lecture at the Higher Technical School of Kaindorf in Austria. Good, so let's just start right away. I just created a small image there where we see how the whole process works when authenticating with JWT with a JSON web token. So first of all, we have our HTTP request, and before our requests can meet some endpoint in the controller, there are some filters this request has to go through. And first of all, this is the filter that we're going to define ourselves, so the JWT authentication filter. Then we have the exception translation filter. This one is used for handling all the exceptions that might come up in earlier filters. And at the very end, we have the authorization filter, which is then there to check if the user and the password and everything is correct and if there were no problems before. Okay, I have a more detailed picture up here where we see exactly how that whole thing works. Basically, this can be somehow compared to an airport, this whole process. So first of all, we have the course filter here, which checks if you as a passenger are allowed to travel to some country or whatever. Then we have our header rider filter, which is just responsible that we meet all the security regulations that we have to meet there. We have the security context persistence filter. This one is used when we have sessions, but as JWT is stateless, so this filter will be deactivated. The same is also true for the CSRF filter here. Then there is our own filter, so the JWT authentication filter. And this one, if we want to compare it somehow, this one is used to check the boarding pass. So our JWT is the boarding pass. Are we allowed to board? Then we have our username password authentication filter to check if we are allowed to go to the correct gate. So this is all about roles and rights that we have. Then once again, the exception translation filter. So if something's not correct, then this is being done there. And at the very end, we do a final check if everything and all the conditions that we set up before are met. And then finally, we can come to the controller. And this whole thing is then also executed back. So when the controller sends back some response, it's just going through that filter again. Okay, so we have now defined somehow the basics that we need, and I think it's good now to start with the project. I created a new Spring Boot project here that we have. We have the application in here, and I also already defined some BOM XML file there. And maybe we just go through what's needed there. So first of all, we have here the starter data JPA, the starter security, and the starter web. So the starter dependencies that we need. Then also in starter dependency for the validation, because we will validate things afterwards. Then we have our Spring Boot dev tools. We have the dependency for Postgres, so we'll be using PostgreSQL as a database there. We have the Lombok dependency. We have the Spring Boot starter. We have the Spring Security test. So these two test dependencies there. And then we have three dependencies that we need for handling all the JWT stuff, which is the JWT API, the implementation, and the JWT checksum. So these are all the dependencies that we need. So if you're not ready yet, just pause the video and find the dependencies, put them in your BOM XML, and make sure to refresh your Maven. And when you're done with that, you can continue. I also already provided the applications.properties file because this is also a very standard thing. So we have everything that has to do with the data source. So we have a PostgreSQL database here, which is somewhere on localhost with the JWT database. Username and password in my case is just Postgres, and the driver to be loaded there. Then when it comes to Hibernate, we want the DDL to be updated whenever there is a change. We're defining what the dialect should be, and we also said that we want to see the SQL that's produced down there. And then we also want this SQL to be formatted in some way so that it's at least easier to read and to debug. I'm setting my server port to 8081 as there is already something running on port 8080 in that machine. And then finally, what we did is some logging. So I set the logging level of the Spring Framework security to be info. For Hibernate, it's debugging. And then I also defined trace here for the basic binder. Good. We're just missing two things in there. And the things that we're missing are the JWT settings. So let's just go down there. So JWT settings. So this is what we are missing. When doing JWT, we need two things because we need to sign somehow our JWT and therefore we need a secret. And the secret is what we're going to create right now. And this is defined in application security jwt.secret. And this is just some key goes here. And then we also need somehow an expiration for our JWT, and we also define that in here. So we also say application.security JWT and then expiration equals, and there I defined 864. So that should be 1 day in there. Okay, so this is what we're doing. These are the properties that we're setting up here. And I think if we're just going to run it once, we should see that it's hopefully coming up and that it's working in some way. So let's see. Okay, so it looks good. So everything was started. That's fine. That's how we need it. Good. I think we are ready to go on. And the first thing that we need is we need some user. Because we want to save a user in our database, we want to just create a simple login and a sign up with different user roles, and then we're defining different endpoints with different privileges so that you see how that works and all the different possibilities that you can realize here using Spring Security. Okay, first of all, maybe let's create all the packages that we need because we need some packages there. First of all, it's the auth package, so everything that has to do with the authorization is being put in there. We need one package for all the configuration that we're going to do. Then, as always, a package for our controllers. One more package for database, so everything that's database related, we will do some initial loading in there. Then we will also have the entity package for all the entities that we have. In our case, it will just be one entity. Then the repository package for the repositories we're going to use. And finally, we have a service package down there. Okay, so these are the packages, and I think we're going to start with the entity. And we're creating a new class. And first of all, we're creating an enum because we want to define the different roles that are available in our program. And the roles that we're defining is user, admin, and manager. So these are the three roles. These will be the ones that we're going to use. Now I think we're ready to start with our first entity, which is also the only one in that case, just a user. And our class user, so that it becomes an entity, we have to use the annotation at entity. I want to rename it in the database, so it should be named users, but entities should always be in singular, so that's why I'm doing that one here. We need a data, we need the builder, because we're going to create objects. We need the AllUx constructor and also maybe the NoAx constructor there. And when working with SpringSecurity, SpringSecurity somehow requires a user to have special attributes or at least some attributes. And so that will make sure that we are handling these attributes and we're not forgetting about something. We're implementing the user details here, which forces us to implement some methods. Okay, so there are some methods that need to be implemented, and I think for the first, we're just taking all of them. So we're just implementing all of these methods there. Okay, so there you go. We still have some error here because we're missing the ID. So our primary key, so let's define our primary key. I think a generated value in that case would be fine. And we're just doing it as an identity. And it's just a simple ID in our case. So we also need some username. And what's very important here, the username cannot be nullable, so this shouldn't be allowed. And the username should be unique. That's very important. So we don't want two users to have the same username. I think that wouldn't make any sense. Then we'll also go on with the password. And also here it's important to define that the password cannot be null. Okay, last thing we are missing is the role. So private role. And I think it makes sense to set some enumerated here. So this defines how this is shown in the table. And I think it's easier to see the role as a string instead of it being represented as a number only. So we're defining enumerated to be a string there. Okay. So let's see, we have some methods that have been overwritten down there, and let's check how to implement them. So first of all, we have our get authorities, and this method should define which different authorities that are in there. So what we're doing is we're returning a list, that's for sure true. And what we do is we're returning a new simple granted authority. And the Spring standard forces us to use role underscore followed by role.name. So this means it's then role underscore user, role underscore admin, and so on. So whatever role there is, and this is what's being returned here. So in our case, we just have one role per user, but you can have multiple roles per user if that's what you want to do there. We have two more methods here. So it's get password and get username. And in our cases, we used username and password as property names up there. It should be fine if we don't implement them because using the Lombok library already does that for us. But just for you to make sure that you understand where this comes from, I will just leave them in there. Okay, for now we're not handling if the account is expired or something else, so we're just setting all of them here to be true, so everything is fine, it's not locked, the credentials are not expired, and the user is enabled. So we're just doing it in that way because we do not want to change anything there. So that should be fine for us right now. Good. Next step is that we need some user repository because I think it makes sense that we're just generating 3 users, putting them into the database so that we have some test data to work with because we won't start with the sign up request, but with the login request that we will do at the beginning. So to bring some users to the database, we need a user repository. And a repository is always an interface. And this extends the JPA repository here where we have the user and we use the long. And as we are in this repository already, we're just creating a method that we will need later on. And this returns an optional of the type user, and it's just find by user name. There it is with some string in there. So string username. So this is exactly the method that we need in here. So it's a derived query that we're going to use there. Great. Okay. And the last step to bring at least some of our users into the database, we're going to create some DB loaders or some database loader. We're going to the database package there, and we just name it DB loader. So this is the class we're going to use. So it will just be some component, and we're using Lombok to inject the dependency of our user repository there. And what we need is, because we want to somehow encode the password, so the password should be hashed. We do not want to save them in our database just in plain text. That's not what we're going to do. So therefore, we also need some way to encrypt it, and therefore we're going to use the bcrypt password encoder. This is what I'm looking for. This is my password encoder, and we're just going to create a new one there. So we're using this for hashing. It's, I think it was founded somewhere at the end of the 1990s or 1999 or something like this, and it's based on the blowfish encryption that's being used there. What we do is we're using a public void init users method here, and important is to set it to add post construct. So as soon as this class is being created, this method is executed. And what we do is, so if the user repository dot count is equal to 0, so only if there are no other users in there, we're going to create some test users, okay? So let's use our user. It's user1 equals user. So we use the builder pattern there. That's perfect. So we have a username. First user is called Alice. We have a password. So we're using the password encoder to encode it. And we're just saying it to password 1, 2, 3 for each of the users so that it's easy for us to remember. The role here is user. And then we're just going to build it. Okay. I think I'm just going to copy that twice here. Our user 2 is going to be Bob. Bob is going to be the admin. And then we have our user 3, and our user 3 is going to be Charlie, and Charlie is going to be our manager. Good. So finally, we're just using the user repository to save them. So it's user 1. And then we're just copying that down for user 2 and user 3. That's it. Okay, so that looks great. I think we're ready to run the application and to see if we did everything fine and if it's working out. So hopefully it's working out. We will see. Okay, so it's running everything. It's starting up. Okay, there was something generated. We see, okay, there are some SQL statements. Good. So let's check if that works out. We're just going to connect our data source in here. So it's Postgres, and hopefully there should be some JWT database somewhere. Here it is. Perfect. So we're connecting to that one. We don't need a console. We're just going to use the interface there. Let's see. Okay, so there is one table. It looks like the one that we created. And if we take a look, yes. So there are our 3 users. We have Alice, which is a user, Bob, who is admin, who has a role of an admin, and Charlie, who is the manager. And then we also have the password in there. Perfect. Good. So we are set up to go for SpringSecurity. I think we're just missing one last thing. If you remember, at the very beginning, I told you that we need some key here. We're still missing that key, so we need to create some key, and therefore we're just creating some very small helper class, and we're calling it generate JWT JWT key. And in the class, we just have a very small main method that says, okay, secret key equals, sorry, keys dot secret key 4, and we're going to use io.json web token, the signature algorithm, and the one that we're going to use is SH2512. So these three algorithms just differ in the way they're working for sure, and also the length of the outcoming key. And we're just going to use that one here, so to see what the final outcoming key should be. What with the longest outcoming key, then we have a base 64 key, so we have to encode it. So we're going to use the encoders, base 64, encode, key.get encoded, and then we're just printing it to the console. Secret key plus base 64 key. Okay. So at the moment, I'm not caring about these things being deprecated. I just want to create the key right now, and this is the key that we're going. This is the key that we're going to receive. So this n plus n something. So we are grabbing that here, and we go to our application.properties, and we're pasting it there. Okay, so this is the key that will be used later on for signing our JWT token. Good. So I think we are now really set up. So let's close all the tabs that we have opened. Yeah, we already did some things, but now I think we're ready to step into more detail when it comes to the authentication. So first thing that we need is, when it comes to authentication, is some customer user details service. This service is just used to load the user identified by the username from the database. Therefore, we're going to create the class. So this will just be a service, and as this is the implementation already, we're going to use IMPL here. We will need that later on, but first of all, let's create the service. It's called custom user details service. And this service for sure is the annotation service, and we also need the required X constructor, because we're going to inject our user repository, because we're needing it to load the user. And to make sure that we're not forgetting about something, we're going to implement the user details service. And this already gives us the method that we need, which is load user by username. So this is the one that we need to call there. And we're just very shortly saying, okay, find by username. This is the derived query that we defined before. We're passing the username. And as this is an optional, if nothing is found, or if some error comes up, we're just using a username not found exception, where we say, okay, user not found, and then we're just passing the username. So that should make clear if we have some problem, then we get this exception to be called to be thrown, and then we will see that there is some problem in there. Okay, why do we need that one? Later on, then, this customer user details service will be used by the DAO authentication provider, which is created somewhere in the background. So we are not creating it by ourselves, but the authentication manager is going to create it. And this is what we are going to do next, because now we are starting with the JWT service. So the service of checking the tokens and creating the tokens and all of these things. Good. So in our service, we're going to create a new interface, and that interface is called JWT service. Why are we creating an interface? Um, Usually this pattern is used if you want to exchange the way of how you're implementing different things. So in this interface, we're defining all the methods that we need for a JWT service, but you can have different implementations to choose from afterwards. In our case, we just have one implementation, but it was important for me to show you that this pattern exists and how to use it. So first, what we need, the first method is the generate token. So from some user that we have, oh, make sure to use the correct user because I didn't, so it should be that one. We want to generate our JWT token. Then we have some method that tells us if the token is valid. So we need to pass the token first, and we need to pass some user details because this is what we want to compare it to, because we have some user and we want to check if that token is valid for a special user. And the last thing that we need is the extract username, because we need some method to extract the username from the token. And these are the three methods that we're going to implement now in our JWT service implementation. So that works out by just going to the implementation part here. It's our JWT service IMPL. So it's fine to do it in that way because Spring is not relying on class names when it comes to dependency injection. So this is fine. Once again, this is a service and we need the required Axe constructor because we're going to inject some things. So first of all, what we need to do is we need to access our secret key and our expiration time, because this is what we need when creating the token, because this is part of the token. So we have our secret key here, and we can use the add value annotation to grab that secret key by just using this annotation here. And I think it's very important that you use this factory annotation value. So don't use another one that won't work out for you. And then we can just select that this is the secret. And then we also have the JWT expiration in milliseconds. So once again, add value, $, curly brackets, and then it's going to be the expiration. Okay, so this automatically loads the values that we defined in our application properties down there. So these two to our variables, secret key and JWT expiration milliseconds. And the cool thing is that now also the yellow warning is gone here because we used it now in there. Okay, so I think we should implement the JWT service, which brings us in the three methods that we just defined before. And I think we are ready to start with the first one, with the generate token. So I think that's very straightforward. So we're going to use the IO-JSON web token dependency that we just defined before. And there is also some builder pattern implemented there. First of all, we're going to define the subject. So the subject is always our username. This is what we're defining. And then we're also setting a claim, and we're going to set the role to be the claim. So user.getRole.name. You can also add more claims if you want to. In our case, I'm just going to add one claim, and this is showing what the user is. Then we're going to use the issued at. So when this was shown, and as JWT and Spring are expecting Unix timestamp here, we are not allowed to use local date or local date time. So we're just going to use date, and we're defining the current time that we have. Then we have to set the expiration. So once again, a new date, it's system current millis, and we're just adding the expiration in milliseconds because we have this. And then finally, we're going to sign it with some key. We don't have a key yet, so let's leave that open for now. And then with compact, we are creating a string out of our token. So I'm going to close that up so that we have more space. Good. So we are missing some things there, especially our key. So we need to add another method, and this method returns a secret key, and it's just called get sign in key. First, we need some byte array defining our key bytes, and we're using once again decoders base64.decode the secret key. The secret key is the one that we already defined up there, and then we're returning keys.hmag SHA key for our key bytes. So this is what we're going to return, and this is what we're going to use up here. So get sign in key. This already creates our whole token. That's great. So that's everything when it comes to creating a token. Nothing more. Not that hard. Let's go down there a little bit, and what we want to do is we want to extract the username, and to extract the username we need a method to do so. So I'm defining a new method which is extracting all the claims that we have in our token that we're going to pass to this method. And this is also, I think, very easy. So we're once again using the dependency that we define, and we're using the passer now. We're not building it, but we're passing it. So first of all, we have to verify with our key if that's fine. Then we're going to build it, and then we can parse the signed claims there from our token that we define, and then we're just getting the payload, and the payload is what our claims are. And now we can implement the extract username here, because we can just say extract all claims. We're passing the token, and as you remembered before, we were setting the username to be the subject, so we can just say get subject now. Okay? This is how to extract the username. But there is still something missing. We still have the is token valid, and the question is, when is a token valid? I think a token is valid if the username in the token is matching the user that's trying to use that one there, and if it's not expired yet. So we somehow have to find out the expiration date. So we need a method to extract the expiration. So it's date. Oh, sorry, date. That's what we're going to use. Extract expiration. So we have some token, and we want to extract what the expiration date is. Once again, we're using our method extract all claims token.get expiration. That's it. Still, token is valid. We need to check the username, and then if it's expired. So I think to make it easier and a little bit more standard, we're going to create another method where we say is token expired. So to check if the token might be expired, we will see. So we're returning the extract expiration of our token, and we want to check if it's before today, because if the expiration is after today, then it's already being it is not valid anymore. So if it's before today, then the token is expired, otherwise it's still valid. This is how it works. So when it comes to our is token valid, now we're going to grab the username, but just using extract username, and then we're returning. What are we going to return? So if the username equals the user details.get username, then this is fine, then the token is valid, and also the token cannot be expired. So if both of these conditions are true, then the whole token is valid and we are fine there. Good, okay. This is already everything about the JWT service. So to recap once again, we are grabbing the secret key. We are grabbing our defined expiration time in milliseconds. All of these things are set up in the application.properties file. Then we're generating our token by setting the username to be the subject. The role is one of the claims. Issue date and expiration is being set, and we're assigning it with the key. To check if the token is valid, we first of all have to find out if the username in the token matches the user that wants to use the token, and if it's not expired already. And the expiration is checked by checking the expiration date. And therefore, we created that method to extract all the claims, which uses the parser first to verify if it's signed correctly, billing it, and then parsing all the claims. This is what the JWT service implementation is about. Great. Now we are ready to go on with the authentication. So the authentication is now already the thing containing login and sign up methods. So the service that we're going to call from our controller. So we are going to our service and we are creating another interface here. This is the auth service. And before we do that, we need to define two more things, because what we need is some DTOs to send in our requests and responses. So we're going to create an auth request and an auth response in our auth package up here. So this is just the auth request. We want to create some getter and setter methods there. What do we need? We need a private string username, and we need a private string password, and both of them cannot be blank. So you can use the validation in the control afterwards. So this is important to define. And then whenever something went correctly, we're going to use the auth response, or we're sending the auth response. And also in here, we're going to create the data and the, all logs constructor there, and we're just going to send the token. So nothing more, but the token is the only thing that we're going to send. Fine. Okay, so let's head back to our service. We have a method called login. This method passes some auth request, and it should return some auth, not request, but response. Okay, so this is what it should do, and I think we're also doing the sign up at the same time. So we have the sign up here. We need some sign up request we still need to create. And for the sign up, we're not returning anything because we're just telling that the sign up worked out. And I think that's it. So we're doing nothing more there. Okay, what do we need for the sign up request? Let's create it. Sign up request. Once again, we need the data. We need the all args and the no args constructor to be set up there. And I think I just misspelled that there. So let's rename it to sign up request. So that should be correct. Now, what do we need? We need the username, we need the password, and we need to define the role, but I think that can be optional. So not blank for that one here and not blank for that one here, but I think the role can be blank. That's fine. So we're just defining a default role afterwards, and then we are fine there. Okay, so our auth service should also be correct now if I'm spelling it correctly. Sign up request. There we go. Great. So I think now we are ready to come to our the authentication service implementation. It's not that hard a thing, so we go to the implementation down there. It's the auth service IMPL. Once again, this is a service. and we need to inject some things there. Good. So now is the point where we need our authentication manager. This is what I mentioned before. This manager is the one that's going that's using our user and user details and the custom user details service afterwards. We're telling it to do so. And currently we have some error in here, but this error is fine because we didn't create a bean for this authentication manager. So we have to do that afterwards. So that works out fine. But we're currently just leaving it as it is. We're coming to that afterwards. Good. What else do we need? We need our JWT service. We need our user repository. And we need a password encoder. And for the password encoder, we have the same problem. So we have to define them somewhere. And we're going to do that in the security config. So we're going to the config package here. We're creating a new class, and the class is called the security config. And that's the configuration that we'll be working on afterwards. So it's a configuration, and we're going to enable the web security. That's very important when it comes to all the security logic with the HTTP requests. And we're also going to enable the method security, which is a very cool feature we're going to check out at the very end. Also defining the required acts constructor there, but that's not to be used right now. So what we do is we are creating an authentication manager now. Authentication manager, it's an authentication configuration that we're going to pass in there for creating it. And then we're just returning a new authentication manager. And we have to throw some exception there. Good. And for it to be available in Spring, we're using the @bean annotation. And the same is being done for the password encoder that we're going to create. And then we're just using the same as we did before, so the bcrypt password encoder. As soon as we do these things, and when we go back to our implementation, the error messages are gone here. So we are fine because the injection now works out. That's it. Great. So we should not forget to implement our auth service, because this brings in the two methods that we have to implement, which is the login and the sign up. So first, let's go with the login. We're receiving some requests in there, and what we have to do is we have to create some authentication. And this is what we're going to create, and we're using the authentication manager to do so. So we're using authentication manager to authenticate. And what do we need? We just need a new user password authentication token. And that token needs a username and a password. Okay. And as you remember before, this authentication manager is then later going to use our custom user detail service, or what we implemented to how to get the user details and all of these things in the next step. So we're grabbing the user details, user, and now we can use the authentication.get principal. This is now grabbing the user information by using our custom class that we created. Then we're defining, or we're creating the JWT using our service. So it's just generate token. We're passing the user, but we have to cast it to user, which should be fine because the user is implementing user details. That's great. And then finally, what we're going to return is a new auth response where the JWT is part of it. So that's it for the login. So it's just creating an authentication using the authentication manager and a username password authentication token with the username and the password we received from our request. Then we have our user details that we're going to create. We're creating our token and then we're returning the response. It's very important to understand that this login is called after all the authentication is being done. So after we know that it's fine and the user has the rights to access whatever is going to access. So the endpoint is always the very last thing that's being called. So, but this is for the login. So the login will be some public endpoint so anyone can access it. And then we have our sign up down there. What is the important thing about the sign up? I think it makes sense that if the user is already in the database, that shouldn't work out. So if the user is present in the database somewhere, I think we can throw a new illegal argument exception, which is saying username already exists. So this is a problem. We cannot go on there. Otherwise, we're going to catch the role. And we're defining it as mentioned before. We have one default role. So if the role that we're getting is not null, then we say, okay, get role to uppercase. That's what we want to use. And otherwise, we're defining it to be the user. So the standard or the default role is the user. Everything else cannot be a default. Everything else has to be defined there. So we have a user now. New user equals user, and we're going to build a new one. The username comes from the request. So we have the username in our request. The password is going to be encoded. So we're going to use the password that we're defining to save it into our database. We're using the role there, and then we're just, sorry, not notifying, but building it. And last but not least, we're using the user repository to save it to our repository. So this is the sign up request. Okay, once again, so we're checking if the user already exists. If not, we're defining default role, we're creating the user and saving it. And for the login, we have to create an authentication. We have to grab our user details to create the JWT, and then we're returning the JWT. That's it. So that's everything that's important when it comes to the services. Good. So I know that's a lot of stuff to think about, but let's sum it up once again so that we know what we have in there. So we have the auth request, auth response, and the sign up request, which are just three classes that's acting as DTOs to sending data to the client and vice versa. We have the security config. Right now, security config is just being used to have a correct injection of the authentication manager and the password encoder. We have our database loader to just create the users that we need for testing, the generated JWT key, which creates the key for us, our entities, so the role in the user repository to find the user using a username, and then we have the services. We have the customer user detail service implementing the method to grab the user from the database. We have the JWT service implementation, which implements everything that has to do with the token, with the JWT token. So everything that is when it comes to generating a token and to validating a token. And then finally, we have the auth service, which is the one to be used by the controller afterwards when authenticating, so when doing the login and when doing the sign up. Great. I think you should now be ready to go on with the next steps. If not yet, please feel free to pause the video now to recap what we just did, maybe to take a look at all the classes and the implementation again, to check out if some things not clear and trying to understand it. I think that's a very important thing before we're going to continue. Okay, but because now we're going to start with the filter. Um, you still remember the filter chain that I showed you at the beginning? And we're now going to create our own filter. So the one that we are defining. And therefore, we're going to, where is it? The config is here. And we're going to create a new class. And this new class is being called JWT authentication filter. So the one that we saw in the image before. Oh, and I once again mistyped that. Authentication filter. Now it should be correct. Good. So we're extending a once per request filter. This is very important because this means that that filter is done for every request that's coming, and that's very important here. And we're doing the add component annotation, the required X constructor, and I think it might be good to have some logging in there. So I'm just going to also annotate the SLF for J. Good. So we see there is at least one method that we need to implement, which is the do filter internal, and that's the one that we're going to use. And first of all, what we need is the JWT service for sure, because this is where we get all the things from. And we need the custom details service because we have to define that this is our user details service to be used. Okay. What do we have in our do filter internal? We have the request, we have the response that we can use, and we have the filter chain. Why do we have the filter chain here? Because you see, as you remember at the beginning, we had that image. Maybe I still have it somewhere to show it to you because I think that might make sense. Maybe that one here. We have a chain of filters, and as we are injecting our own filter here, we have to make sure that even if our filter is not applying or something's not working, that the next filter is still executed. So we have to continue the chaining. That's why we still have that in there. You will see then at the end how to use that. Okay, so I think I want to start with a log here. So just to log that the JWT filter for the request, whatever the request is, and we're just going to grab the request URL so we know what endpoint we were requesting. We are grabbing the auth header. Why? Because the token is being sent in the header in the field authorization. This is where it's being sent to the server, and we have to check. So if that header is null, or for any reason the authorization is not starting with bearer, because this is what it should start with, we have a problem. So we just say no token in the request. And if there is no token in the request, this means either it's sign in, it's sign up, it's public, or it's an unauthorized request. So we don't know what it is, but at least there is no token in there, which means we are done now, but the other filters still need to apply. So we're saying, okay, filter chain.doFilter request response. And this is what I mentioned before. So now at that point, this is where we passing to where we're saying, okay, we are done with our filter, now the next one can run. Never forget that one, because otherwise you're somehow interrupting the filter chain there. Then the next thing that we do is we're grabbing our JWT. So we're using the header substring, so we know it's bearer here. So it's 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So at index 7, our token has to start. That's what we do. And then we are also grabbing the username. So we're using the service to extract the username from our token. Fine. So far, we're good. And now we're checking again. So if the username is not null, we're fine. And we also have to check the security context. So we're grabbing the security context holder and we're grabbing the security context. And we are checking the authentication, because if there has already been an authentication, we do not want to override it. Therefore, we just check if there is no authentication before we continue for that user. Then we have the user details. And we're grabbing our service that we have to load the username. There it is. And now we're finally checking the token. So we're using our JWT service to check if the token is valid. We have to pass the token and the user details. If the token is valid, we are very happy because then we can continue. So we can go on now. Otherwise, so if the token is not valid, we have to do something. So we are logging a warning where it says we have an invalid JWT token for some user. And this is really when we want to end, because now we're just going to send an error and it's being unauthorized because we don't have an authorization to do that. So invalid JWT token. And then we're returning. If the token is valid on the other hand side, it's good, and we have to set the security context. So we have to set the security context in Spring, which defines that user is being logged in with that role, and then Spring can decide which endpoints are accessible by that user with that certain role. So we are creating a username password authentication token. This is our auth token. Just using this here. The user details. We don't have any credentials because they are inside the user details, and then we are grabbing the authorities. So this is the method that we did override in the user class, if you remember. Okay. When done, we have to set some more details, because we're going to set the web authentication detail source. We're building the details here, and we're setting the request there. So this is very important. And then finally, we're setting the context. So we are once again grabbing the security context holder, get context, and then we are setting the authentication. This is then the token to be set. Now it's being done, and now we're just logging some info which says JWT authentication object created. Authentication. So that's it. And now is the thing that many people forget. So please don't forget that when we're done, so JWT filter finished, we have to pass on to the next filter. So we're using the do filter with the request and the response. So please never forget about that, because then we have an interruption in there. Invalid. That's how it's written. Okay. So this is our JWT filter. So authentication filter. Now, as we're done with that one, we have to do one more thing before we can step into the security config, because there are at least two things, because there might be some errors during the authentication. And as you know from before, all these errors come up before the controller is called. So our global error handling is not working here. So we need to handle these errors in some other ways. And therefore we are creating classes to do that. And we're creating a class per error. And the most common error is the JWT unauthorized endpoint, which means some user is not allowed to access that endpoint. And we're implementing the authentication entry point here, which makes us to implement the commence function method. So we have a component, we have the required X constructor, and what we're going to do in there is very easy. So we're just saying, okay, the response status should just be unauthorized, because that's what it is. And then we're going to set the content type, and we're going to set some, I think we have to do it the other way around. We're going to set some media type and then application JSON value, because we want to send some JSON value. To define all the values that we want to send, we're going to use a map. So with just having a string and an object in there, this is our response body, some hash map. And what do we want to add? So first of all, what we want to add is the status. And the status, as we already know, is our unauthorized. So we're just copying what we have there. This is the unauthorized. Then the next thing that we want to set is the error. So what is the message? So we're grabbing the auth exception, the authentication exception, to get the message there. And then the last thing that we want to add is for sure the path. So what was the URL that we were getting this error for? Good. And then finally, we want to write that. And still remember, if you want to write JSON, we need some object mapper, and we can also just inject that one there. And we're saying mapper.writeValue. We are grabbing the writer that we have in our response. So if you see, this is a print writer, and then we're defining the response body to be written. So this is the first thing when it comes to unauthorized. And the second thing that comes up often is access denied. So you don't have the correct rights to do something. So we are creating one more class to do so. This is the JWT access denied handler. This is what we're using here. And we're implementing the access denied handler, which once again gives us some method here. And now I'm going to copy a lot of the things we had from before. So we're once again injecting the object mapper. And then I'm just going to the unauthorized endpoint. I'm going to copy everything that I have in there. I'm going to put it here. And instead of unauthorized, we say it's going to be forbidden here and there. For sure, it's another exception now. So it's the access denied exception, and all the other things can just stay as they are. So we're somehow thinking about the two main errors, which is the unauthorized and the access denied. Good. And now I think we're finally at the core point where everything comes together, and this is our security config, where we're defining the security filter chain, so where we see how the things work out. So we already created the security config up here. We already defined all the annotations that we have that we need, and now we're going to create our chain. So this is the security filter chain. So we're going to create a new one, security filter chain with an HTTP security. That's what's coming in there, and this must be available because this chain should be used afterwards, hopefully. So we're starting with the HTTP, and now we're defining exactly the chain here. Good. First thing, if you still remember, was to define the CSRF, and we're just going to disable it because we're not using it. We're not needing it. Why? Because it's stateless. So whenever it comes to JWT, we're working stateless. So we're using a method reference here to disable it. Okay. So then the next thing to go for is the authorize HTTP requests. And in here, we are defining the, how to say, we're defining all our endpoint permissions. So we are using this authorization here. And then we're defining request matchers. And now we can say, okay, /API/auth and everything that's directly in that directory is allowed. So permit all. This applies to login and register and so on. And it's important to understand that /API/auth/login is allowed, but /a/login is not permitted. Very important. This is why we have one asterisk here only. If we have two asterisks, that means everything that's in any subfolder or whatever is being allowed. But we're just using that one here. The next thing is the API maintenance. So when it comes to maintenance, who is allowed to do the maintaining things? I think the manager only. So has role.manager.name. So only users with the role manager are allowed to access this endpoint. And then we also, well, what else can we create? Oh, we can create some public folder here. So everything that's in public is allowed. So we are defining that endpoint is allowed for anyone. That endpoint is allowed for anyone. That endpoint is allowed for managers only. And what about all the others? So any request, all the other requests need to be authenticated. So this is what we're defining here. So any other requests need to be authenticated. Nothing more is public. If you're forgetting about that thing, we have a problem. And also what's important here is the order. Because you can, if you're mixing up the order and you're using endpoints with deeper paths, there might be a problem. The next thing that we're going to set up is the session management. There is no. So we have to say that there is no session management. By just defining session creation policy, and then we're defining this to be stateless because we don't have one. Now we are setting the user detail service that should be used, and we're grabbing our user detail service, so the one that we defined before, and this is what we need to inject up here. So private final custom user detail service, user detail service. So this is the one, the place where we're defining that. And now we're coming to the exception handling. So we say dot exception handling. What happens if some error comes up? We have some authentication entry point that we created, and we have some access denied handler that we created, if you remember. So we need to inject them. So private final JWT unauthorized endpoint and private final JWT access denied handler, and we're just passing them down there. Okay, that's it. And the last thing that we're missing is our own filter. So we're going to inject our own filter. This is our JWT authentication filter, and this is the very last that we're going to set. And now it's important to see what I'm going to do because I'm using the add filter before. And this is very important because when do we want to set the filter? Our filter should be set before the username password authentication filter. So remember, our user up here, our own filter was the one for the username password authentication filter. Okay, this is why we're using the before here. So make sure to use the before, otherwise you might have some problems. Semicolon at the end. Good. And when we are done, we can just return that and we can just say http.build. And this is what we're returning, and we have to add some exception or throw some exception here with the method signature. Okay, that's it. So once again, to recap, this is the filter chain. We're building our filter chain here. We're defining to disable CSRF, and then we're defining all the different endpoints and which ones are allowed for everyone, permit all, and which ones are allowed to certain roles only, and all the others are need to be authenticated. We have one asterisk there, meaning everything in this directory, and with the double asterisk, this means everything in the directory and also in subdirectories. We define that this whole thing is stateless. We're setting the user detail service to be used, which is our own. We're defining which endpoints to use for unauthorized access and access denied, and then we're adding our own filter before the username password authentication filter. And when done with that, we're returning it. This is exactly how that whole thing works out. Okay, and I think we're just missing one last thing before we can test this, and this is our controller. So the auth controller, what do we have in there? We just have a very simple REST controller. We have the request mapping. So this should be /API/auth, which is the authentication. And for the dependency injection, we need the required Axe constructor because we need our service in there. So the authentication service that we created. Good. So let's see. Add host mapping /login. We're returning a response entity with the auth response here that says login, and we're checking. So we're saying if it's valid, we're grabbing our request body, which should be some auth request. And in there, I think that's not the easiest part. We're just using to return a response entity with OK, which grabs our service and calls the login for our auth request. And then the next thing and the last thing in that controller, oh, it's not past, it's post mapping here. That's our sign up. Also here we're just returning a string. We don't have really something set up to return here. We have we're requesting the body, which is a sign up request. And then finally we have the auth service to process the sign up. And when done, we're just returning a 200 OK user registered successfully. Okay. So I think that's it. You can also send the token here already if you want to. I think when the registration is done, we don't want to send the token already because maybe we want to first of all verify if the email address was correct or whatever. So I'm leaving that open because this is what we're going to do in another episode of SpringSecurity. I think we should be ready to run this and to try it out. So let's see. Let's run it. Good. I just ran the key creation. Let's run the application. And let's see if everything works out. Okay, it's working out. That looks good. I'm going to use Postman to test this. So I'm going to create a new GET request here. And the request goes to localhost 8081 login. And I mean, I can just send that one, and it gives you an error which says full authentication is required to access this resource. Question is if that is correct, because it's not correct because we don't need an authorization, but it says here, no token request, sign in, sign up, public, unauthorized. So we don't know yet what it is, and we also didn't catch that thing up. Okay. What's the problem? What's missing? For sure, it's the body that's missing here because we need to send some data when it comes to this post request. And the data that we need to send is for sure our JSON file here. And I think the question is if we want to do it raw. Yeah, let's do it raw. We're just going to send some JSON file here, and this has to be the username first. Let's start with Alice, and then we have to use the password 123. Let's send this post request again, and now we see something else happened. Let's check the output that we have in here. Now we just see that there is no problem in there. We still see that we don't have anything to set up there. The login, okay, but it looks like we are done and we received our token. So if we do that again, we get another token. We see that here in the output. Okay, and now we can try. No, we cannot try to log in because we don't have a controller yet. We're doing that in a second, but first let's try the sign in. We can also do the sign in here. And for the sign in, we can send a role, but we don't have to. And let's use Tom here as the username, and let's try to sign in. And we get some error here. Good. So we have the username and the password, but we didn't design a role. I think the problem was that it's called sign up and not sign in. So let's go for sign up maybe. And now the user is registered successfully. And this means if we go to our database, there should be some user Tom in there with the password hashed correctly. Good. Looks fine. Perfect. So, guys, congratulations. You created your first SpringSecurity JWT project, and now we're going to test it. Now we're going to find out how all these things work. So we're starting to create just a very small demo controller, and in that controller, we're testing the different things. So this is a REST controller with some request mapping /API. And what do we do? So first of all, let's just create a very simple GET request that comes to public hello, where we say this is public string public hello. It's very, very simple. It's just for testing it. Hello from public endpoint, no token needed. Good. Let's see if that's correct. So we're starting it up, and I'm opening up a new tab here for a GET request. Let's just grab that one here. And I think it was public hello, and it was a GET request. So just run that one here. Hello from public endpoint, no token needed. Fine. So this works out. This is exactly how we expect that to be. And why is that working? Because in our filter chain here, we're defining that API public is allowed for all. Good. Let's create another one. Let's create a private one. Let's say it's a private slash hello string private hello there. We're grabbing just the same message. We're saying it's private. And now there is a token needed, and not any token, a valid token is needed. Let's try if this works out. Oh, it should have been private and not something weird, different thing. Hello from private endpoint, valid token needed. Good. It's running. Good. I think it started up. So let's check out. We're in there. We just change that to private. Send. Problem. 401 unauthorized. So we need to log in. Full authentication is required to access for sure. It's needed. So let's log in as Alice as we did before. So we get the token here. And now we're just going to send the token with that request. So in our header, we're just creating another one here for the authorization. And it has to say bearer followed by the JWT token. Now let's try it again. And now we see, okay, hello from private endpoint, valid token needed. And we have a valid token, therefore we are allowed to get in there. That's perfect. So now we see that also our JWT filter is running through. Okay, so our filter is only called if it's not there for any public things. Okay, that's really cool. Okay, let's do one more to check the thing with the role. So one more request. It's now maintenance. Maintenance equals slash hello. And there we have a public string manager hello. And we say hello from manager endpoint, role manager needed. Okay, so we can test this in a very simple way. Do we still remember who are the managers? I don't. So we are currently logged in as Alice. So Alice is not a manager, so we need to log in as Charlie. But let's see. So this is Alice's token now. Let's see what happens. Oh, we're still for private hello, so let's go for maintenance hello. And now we're not getting an unauthorized because we are authenticated. We get a 403 which says forbidden, so we're not allowed to access that one. So let's try to get a token for Charlie. There it is. Let's copy that token for Charlie and add it in here. And if we're sending it with Charlie's token, who is a manager, we're allowed to get in there. That's perfect. Cool. And we have one more thing that I want to show you. And this one more thing is the following. Basically, if we're defining endpoint specific permissions, we're doing it using our security filter chain as we're doing it here. But also there we have limits. So when it comes to special things, we have a limit, we have limits in there. And one of the special things is what we're going to try out now. We have a get mapping which says /users and then passing a username in our path. So this is not allowed or not possible within the filter chain. So we have to do something different. Let's see how that works. We're just naming it get user, and I think we have a path variable there, which is string username. And then We also have an authentication, which is automatically injected um, as soon as the authentication is correct. So we can use this afterwards. And if you still remember, inside the security config, we defined the enable method security. This is exactly what we're going to use now. We're going to use the annotation pre-authorize. And in there, we can define a lot of cool things. Because who should have access to that endpoint? For sure, it's always the user itself. So if the user itself wants to see his own information, that should be fine. And also the admin should be able to do that. So we say hash username equals authentication dot name. This is the username. So if the username in here is the same as the user that's currently authenticated, then we are fine. Or if the role of the user that's being authenticated is admin, then we can also access that one. And to check that out, we have access granted to user profile, and we're passing the username, but we say logged in as authentication get name, and just closing the bracket there. Okay, so we're defining that only the user itself and the admin can see the different user information. And hopefully we did that correctly. So let's see if that works out. So we are now currently logged in as the manager, which is Charlie here, or we have his token at least. And what we do here is we're going to go to users/Charlie, and I think that should work out. So access granted user profile Charlie, logged in as Charlie. That's fine. But what if we're grabbing Alice? Access denied, 403, forbidden. This is not allowed. Okay, so Bob is our admin. So let's check if we're going to grab the token of Bob here. And we're sending it again. Access granted to profile Alice, but we're logged in as Bob. But Bob is the admin, therefore Bob is allowed to do that. So this is how you can even take that to another level and have very, very clear and very specific security definitions for your different endpoints. This is how that works out. Good. So maybe just recap this whole thing once again. So everything that we discussed. So we have all the things that have to do with our users, so the user, the role, the user repository, and also the loader and the key generator that we used for defining all the basic things. Then we also discussed the customer user details, the custom user details service that we want the authentication manager to use. This is defined inside the security config. So down there, we're saying that this custom user details service should be used. We have the JWT service implementation, which is there to generate a token, to validate a token, and the auth service implementation that's just called by the auth controller up here. We have our 3 DDOs that we're going to use, and then we're coming to the config. So we have the JWT unauthorized endpoint and the JWT access handler, access denied handler, which are being used if one of these errors comes up. We have our own filter. So our own filter defining if the token or checking if the token is valid and if everything is fine. And we have the security config where everything comes together and our security filter chain is being implemented. Good, guys. So this was the first episode. There will be at least 1 or 2 more episodes, hopefully not that long, where we'll discuss some extensions and some other things that we can do, like some validations or forgot password function or whatever. And For today, this is already the end of the video. I really hope that you learned something new and also enjoyed it today, although it was a very long video. If you liked it, please leave a like here, leave comments if you want to see some more things or want me to explain other topics. And if you do not want to miss any upcoming episodes, I would be happy if you also subscribe my channel. So guys, thanks for watching and see you again. Bye.